that had been absent before. A wave of silence swept through the federal courtroom as Judge Edith H. Jones, one of the most esteemed figures in the American judiciary, fixed her sharp gaze on Representative Jasmine Crockett. For nearly 4 decades, Judge Jones had presided over thousands of cases with unwavering confidence and precision. But this day was unlike any other. Today, she intended to confront an issue that had deeply shaken the legal world for months. "Congresswoman Crockett," Judge Jones began, her voice carrying the weight of decades on the bench, steady and commanding. "Your recent remarks about our justice system are deeply troubling. Your interpretation of judicial independence reflects a serious misunderstanding of the Constitution." The crowded courtroom grew utterly still. Legal scholars, journalists, and ordinary citizens had gathered expecting a routine judicial conference. Instead, they were witnessing a moment destined for history. A rare and direct confrontation between a revered federal judge and a sitting member of Congress. What followed left everyone breathless. In a handful of precise, deliberate sentences, Representative Crockett delivered a response so powerful, so unexpected, that criticism turned to admiration and silence erupted into long, thunderous applause. This was no mere exchange of words. It was about to become a profound lesson in respect, humility, and the very essence of public service. If you want to witness more moments where wisdom meets humility and timeless principles illuminate our democracy, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. These are the stories that remind us why faith in American institutions still matters, and you won't want to miss a single one. To truly grasp the weight of this encounter, we must first understand the 2 women at its heart. One, a legend of the judiciary. The other, a rising force in national politics. Judge Edith Holland Jones has long embodied the highest ideals of the American legal tradition. Appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit by President Ronald Reagan in 1985, she has devoted nearly 40 years to public service, guided by fairness, integrity, and an unwavering devotion to the Constitution. Now 74, she has presided over more than 3,000 cases and is respected across partisan lines for her meticulous preparation, balanced judgment, and extraordinary grasp of constitutional law. Born in Philadelphia and raised with firm traditional values, Jones graduated from Cornell University and later from the University of Texas School of Law, one of only a few women in her class. Over the years, she became known for her sharp intellect, direct courtroom demeanor, and steadfast belief that judicial independence is the cornerstone of American democracy. Lately, however, Judge Jones had grown increasingly concerned by political assaults on the judiciary. She watched uneasily as certain lawmakers questioned the legitimacy of court rulings simply because they did not align with political agendas. Meanwhile, Representative Jasmine Crockett was quickly emerging as one of the most passionate and outspoken new voices in Congress. A 43-year-old lawmaker from Texas, Crockett brought with her a distinguished career as a civil rights attorney and public defender. Known for her tireless advocacy for justice reform and equality, she had earned a reputation as a fearless defender of the underserved. But some of her recent public statements had stirred deep controversy among legal professionals. In hearings and television appearances, she had accused segments of the federal judiciary of clinging to outdated legal thinking, implying that some judges were obstructing progress rather than upholding justice. While these comments resonated strongly with progressive audiences, many within the legal establishment viewed them as disrespectful, even reckless. Tension had been building for weeks. Legal scholars published op-eds emphasizing the importance of respecting judicial independence. Bar associations issued reminders about the appropriate way to discuss court rulings. Judge Jones, usually measured in her public comments, wrestled privately with whether she should respond. Her opportunity arrived at the annual Federal Judicial Conference, an event where judges, lawyers, and lawmakers come together to discuss pressing issues facing the justice system. Representative Crockett had been invited to deliver a keynote address on criminal justice reform, an invitation that would soon set the stage for an unforgettable confrontation. Have you ever witnessed a single conversation completely change someone's outlook? Share your thoughts in the comments. Why does respectful dialogue between branches of government matter? How have moments like this shaped your own understanding of authority and respect? The morning sessions progressed, routinely until Representative Crockett took the podium. Her presentation was passionate and meticulously researched, focusing on sentencing disparities, deplorable prison conditions, and the urgent need for sweeping reform. The audience listened attentively as she outlined her vision for a fairer, more humane system. But 15 minutes into her speech, the tone shifted. And so did the room. Too many federal judges, Crockett declared, are anchored in outdated thinking. The law must evolve as our understanding of justice and equality evolves. A low murmur rippled through the audience. Several judges exchanged uneasy glances. Crockett's voice rose with conviction. When judges repeatedly issue rulings that preserve systemic inequality, we have to ask, are they truly serving justice or merely protecting an old status quo? From her seat in the front row, Judge Jones remained outwardly calm. But those familiar with her saw the faint tightening around her eyes, a sign of growing concern. The judiciary, Crockett continued, cannot hide behind the cloak of independence when its rulings consistently favor the powerful over the powerless. Respect must be earned, not demanded. The atmosphere grew electric. What had begun as a policy discussion was turning into something much more confrontational. Legal experts whispered among themselves, sensing that a pivotal moment was unfolding. Then, Judge Jones rose. Even at 74, she moved with the poise and authority that had defined her career. As she approached the podium, the crowd fell silent. "Congresswoman Crockett," she began, her tone calm but commanding. "I admire your commitment to justice reform, but I must address the dangerous implications in your remarks." Crockett straightened, momentarily startled by the judge's directness. Two formidable women now stood face to face, one representing the legislative branch, the other the judiciary, in a moment that would test the very boundaries of institutional respect. "Your recent statements," Judge Jones continued, "including what you've said today, reveal a fundamental misunderstanding of the judiciary's role in our constitutional framework. When you imply that judges should decide cases based on social outcomes rather than the law itself, you undermine the very principle of judicial independence." Her tone never wavered, yet the authority in her words was undeniable. "Moreover," she added, "your suggestion that respect for judicial authority should depend on whether one agrees with court decisions is deeply dangerous. It threatens the separation of powers that our founders saw as the guardian of liberty." Crockett stood silent, visibly absorbing the weight of the judge's rebuke. Every eye in the room was fixed on the two women. This was no longer a mere disagreement. It was a defining crossroads for both their careers. Finally, Crockett spoke. Her voice, softer and steadier than before, carried a new humility. "Judge Jones," she said, "I appreciate your willingness to address my concerns directly. Could you help me understand where I may have gone wrong?" It was a simple question, yet it shifted everything. Instead of defending herself or escalating the tension, Crockett chose grace and curiosity over pride. The change was immediate. Judge Jones paused, recognizing the significance of what had just happened. "Congresswoman," she replied, "your passion for justice is essential. But there's a vital distinction between pursuing reform through legislation and expecting judges to abandon legal principles in pursuit of social goals." The courtroom stayed hushed as the two women engaged in what was becoming a profound, thoughtful exchange on justice, authority, and mutual respect between institutions. "When you question judicial legitimacy solely because of a decision's outcome rather than its reasoning," Judge Jones continued, "you weaken public trust in the courts. That trust is not abstract. It is the shield that protects the vulnerable from unchecked power." Crockett nodded, listening intently. Her posture reflected genuine openness, not defiance. "Judge Jones," she said quietly, "I see now that my frustration with certain rulings may have led me to speak carelessly. How can someone in my position advocate for reform while still honoring judicial independence?" What happened next left everyone in the courtroom astonished, including Judge Jones herself. Rather than defend her earlier words or retreat into political talking points, Representative Crockett made a decision that completely changed the tone of the encounter. "Judge Jones," Crockett said, her voice filled with a sincerity of gasps swept through the courtroom. In an era when public figures almost never admit mistakes, this act of humility was truly rare. Several attorneys exchanged stunned looks, and even court reporters paused mid-sentence. Amazed by what they were witnessing over the past few months, Crockett continued, her voice growing steadier and more confident. My frustration with what I saw as unjust outcomes led me to make statements that were both inappropriate and disrespectful toward the judiciary. I now understand that I allowed my passion for justice to cloud my grasp of constitutional principles and the proper relationship between our branches of government. Judge Jones's expression softened slightly, though she remained composed and dignified. The courtroom was silent. So silent that even the bailiffs, usually stoic and detached, leaned in to hear every word. As a former attorney, Crockett went on, her hands clasped in front of her in a sincere gesture of regret. I should have known better. I should have remembered that the strength of our legal system comes from its independence, not from judges making decisions based on public opinion or popular trends. My comment suggested otherwise, and for that I am deeply sorry. The change in tone was extraordinary. What had started as a tense confrontation had transformed into a meaningful exchange of understanding and institutional respect. Many senior lawyers in attendance later said they were moved to tears by the authenticity of Crockett's words. Judge Jones stepped closer to the podium, her black robes whispering softly in the stillness. Her demeanor shifted from stern authority to something almost like mentorship, though she retained the poise and seriousness expected of her position. Congresswoman Crockett, Judge Jones said, her voice carrying both the weight of her experience and an unexpected warmth. Your willingness to reflect, consider, shows exactly the kind of character our democratic institutions need. It takes real courage to admit mistakes publicly, especially for someone in your position. She paused, letting the gravity of her words settle. But more importantly, she continued, your passion for justice, when properly directed, is vital to ensuring our legal system evolves in the right way. The legislative branch plays a critical role in reforming laws that no longer serve justice effectively. My concern was never about your goals, but about the methods you propose to achieve them. Crockett nodded thoughtfully, her defensive tone gone. Judge Jones, would you be willing to help me understand how I can advocate for the reforms I believe in while still showing the proper respect for judicial independence? It was an extraordinary moment. A sitting member of Congress asking a federal judge for guidance on how to do her job more constitutionally. The humility in the room was undeniable, and its impact was immediate. Many observers later said they had never seen an elected official demonstrate such genuine openness and willingness to learn. For the first time during the exchange, Judge Jones smiled, a small but striking gesture that softened her normally stern features. Congresswoman, she said warmly, I would be honored to help you understand how passionate advocacy and institutional respect can work together instead of against each other. She moved slightly, now addressing not just Crockett but the entire audience. This was no longer just a conversation. It had become a lesson for everyone present. The beauty of our system, Judge Jones explained, her tone now that of a teacher delivering an important lecture, is that each branch of government has a distinct but complementary role. Your responsibility is to identify problems in existing laws and write better ones. Our responsibility is to interpret and apply those laws based on the Constitution, not based on desired social outcomes. She gestured toward the framed Constitution displayed on the courtroom wall. When you see court decisions that seem to perpetuate injustice, the correct response is not to attack the judges for following the law. It's to examine whether those laws themselves need to change. That approach respects institutional boundaries while still allowing for meaningful reform. Crockett listened closely, pulling out a small notebook and jotting down notes. Not Ace, a politician defending her views, but Ace, a student eager to learn. The sight of a member of Congress taking notes from a federal judge sent another ripple of astonishment through the courtroom. So, Crockett asked, glancing up from her notes, when I see sentencing disparities that I believe are unjust, my focus should be on changing the sentencing laws, not criticizing judges who are following existing guidelines. Exactly, Judge Jones replied, her approval clear in her tone. And when you pursue that work with genuine respect for judicial independence, Judge Jones explained, you'll discover that many judges actually welcome thoughtful legislative reforms that allow us to deliver justice more effectively. We see the shortcomings of existing laws every single day, but our oath requires us to apply them exactly as they are written, not as we might wish them to be. She paused, then spoke with striking honesty. I've spent 37 years on this bench watching even well-intentioned laws lead to unintended consequences. Many of us in the judiciary would gladly support legislative reforms that address these problems, but those changes must come through proper constitutional processes, not through political pressure aimed at influencing judicial decisions. A look of realization spread across Crockett's face. So, you're saying that judges and lawmakers should be partners in improving the justice system, not opponents fighting over outcomes? Exactly, Judge Jones replied with a satisfied nod. When each branch respects the role of the other, we can work together to build a more just system, while still protecting the constitutional principles that safeguard everyone's rights. The tone of the courtroom had changed completely. What began as a tense confrontation had evolved into a masterclass in constitutional governance, mutual respect, and the balance of power between branches of government. Legal scholars present would later say this was a moment destined to be studied for generations. "Judge Jones," Crockett said with a newfound conviction in her voice, "I want to publicly commit to changing how I talk about judicial decisions. From now on, my advocacy will focus on reforming laws rather than criticizing the judiciary, and I hope you'll hold me accountable for that commitment." Turning to the courtroom audience, she added, "I also want to apologize to any members of the judiciary who felt disrespected by my earlier remarks. Those of us in elected office owe you better." Judge Jones nodded approvingly. "Congresswoman Crockett, your commitment is both noted and deeply appreciated. And yes, I will hold you accountable, not as a critic, but as a colleague equally dedicated to the proper functioning of our constitutional system." The moment that followed would stay with everyone in the room for the rest of their lives. The courtroom erupted into spontaneous applause, a rare and powerful sight in a federal court. It began with a few attorneys, then swept across the room until the entire gallery was standing and clapping. Even the court staff, known for their strict professionalism, joined in. Judge Jones allowed the applause to continue for almost a full minute before gently raising her hand for silence. When the room quieted, she offered what many described as the perfect conclusion to this extraordinary exchange. "What we've witnessed here today," she said, her voice carrying both authority and warmth, "is precisely what the framers of our Constitution envision. Different branches of government engaging in respectful dialogue about their roles, each committed to serving the American people while staying within constitutional boundaries." Looking directly at Crockett, she added with genuine respect, "Congresswoman, you've shown today that true leadership sometimes means admitting mistakes and choosing growth over pride. That is exactly the kind of character our democracy needs." As the session came to a close, something unprecedented happened. Several other judges approached Crockett to shake her hand and personally thank her for her humility and renewed commitment to constitutional principles. Observers later described the scene as one of the most powerful displays of institutional respect and collaborative spirit they had ever seen, a moment where conflict transformed into partnership through the simple power of humility and honest dialogue. The aftermath was unlike anything the legal community had seen in decades. Within hours, video clips of Crockett's apology and Judge Jones's gracious response spread across social media, drawing millions of views and overwhelmingly positive reactions from across the political spectrum. What made the moment so powerful was its sheer rarity. In a time defined by political polarization and constant attacks on institutions, here was a sitting member of Congress publicly acknowledging a mistake and seeking guidance from a federal judge. It was a return to the kind of mutual respect and humility many Americans feared was gone forever. Major news outlets quickly seized on this story, publishing headlines that celebrated both Crockett's humility and Judge Jones's wisdom. Legal experts from across the ideological spectrum praised the encounter as a model for how government branches should interact with mutual respect, honest dialogue, and a shared commitment to constitutional principles. "What we witnessed today was truly extraordinary," said Harvard Law professor Lawrence Tribe. "Representative Crockett showed that political courage sometimes means admitting you were wrong. And Judge Jones demonstrated how judicial authority can be exercised with both strength and grace." Even the American Bar Association issued a formal statement commending both women for embodying the highest ideals of public service, democratic leadership, and institutional respect. The official statement released afterward noted that the courtroom exchange offered an important lesson for every public official. Maintaining healthy relationships between the branches of government is vital to a functioning democracy. For Representative Jasmine Crockett, that moment marked a turning point in how she approached advocacy and public service. In several interviews after the incident, she spoke candidly about how the experience had reshaped her thinking. "Judge Jones taught me something I'll never forget," Crockett explained during a national television interview. "She showed me that you can fight passionately for justice without disrespecting the institutions that uphold it. My job isn't to pressure judges into ruling my way. It's to create better laws that enable them to deliver justice more effectively." When asked what motivated her highly public apology, Crockett's answer reflected real personal growth. "Sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is admit when they're wrong," she said. "I realized that my approach was undermining the very goals I cared about most. Judge Jones helped me understand that institutional respect and justice reform aren't enemies, they're partners." Judge Jones, in her own follow-up remarks, stressed how crucial that moment was for American democracy. What Congresswoman Crockett showed us today is exactly what our system needs. Leaders willing to learn, grow, and place institutional integrity above personal pride. The separation of powers only functions when each branch respects the role of the others. Today's exchange proved that such respect can exist alongside passionate advocacy for change. The educational ripple effects of their conversations stretched far beyond the courtroom. Law schools across the country began incorporating video footage of the exchange into their constitutional law courses to illustrate the importance of interbranch respect and constructive dialogue. Political science professors described it as a textbook example of how democracy is meant to function, with each branch maintaining its independence while engaging in meaningful conversations about their respective responsibilities. Most importantly, the exchange inspired real change in political behavior. In the weeks that followed, several other lawmakers publicly rethought their own rhetoric about the judiciary, crediting Crockett's example for shifting their perspective. 6 weeks after the original event, Representative Crockett and Judge Jones appeared together at a national constitutional law symposium. Their joint appearance, once unimaginable, demonstrated how their relationship had transformed from confrontation into mutual respect and collaboration. Their presentation on advocacy, reform, and institutional respect received standing ovations from legal professionals and was widely hailed as a model for how government branches should work together. "What I learned from Judge Jones," Crockett told the symposium audience, "is that real reform starts with understanding and respecting the system you're trying to improve. You can't build stronger institutions by tearing down the respect that sustains them." Judge Jones, in turn, praised Crockett's evolution as a leader. "Congresswoman Crockett has proven that passionate advocacy and institutional respect can complement one another powerfully," she said. "Since our exchange, her legislative work has been both more impactful and more respectful of constitutional limits." The long-term influence of their encounter continued to resonate deeply within legal and political circles. Young lawyers and future policymakers cited the event as a guide on how to acknowledge mistakes gracefully, and how humility can transform conflict into cooperation. Dota's one constitutional law professor remarked what Judge Jones and Representative Crockett gave us that day wasn't just an example of institutional respect. It was a masterclass in how American democracy is supposed to work when people put principles above pride and value learning over being right. Their powerful exchange reminded Americans that democratic institutions grow stronger not by avoiding disagreement, but by engaging in it with humility, respect, and a shared dedication to constitutional values. At a time when such examples had become rare, that moment in a federal courtroom rekindled hope that wisdom, civility, and institutional integrity can still guide public life. And in the end, Judge Edith Jones's call for judicial independence and Jasmine Crockett's heartfelt response did more than surprise a courtroom. They offered a powerful reminder that American democracy thrives when leaders are willing to learn, evolve, and place institutional integrity above their own egos. If this story of wisdom, humility, and institutional respect renewed your faith in American leadership, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We're dedicated to bringing you more stories of genuine character, leadership, and constitutional principles in action. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us which other examples of real leadership and institutional integrity you'd like us to cover next.